Would you eat a food that is 18 years old? Well, cheddar is one of those foods that gets better and better as it ages. In fact, this is an 18-year-old piece of cheddar, and boy, is it expensive. That's one of the reasons that I like to make cheddar at home. And there's such a great demand for cheddar in my house, whether it's on top of an apple pie or on top of a hamburger or in a grilled cheese sandwich or as part of mac and cheese. And of course, you can serve cheddar as part of a cheese board. Everybody loves cheddar, no matter what your age. Well, today I'm going to show you how I make cheddar at home. This is an advanced cheese making recipe, and I also suggest that you start this recipe early in the morning because there are quite a few steps. So for Give Cheese a Chance, I'm Marianne. Let's get busy making cheddar in the kitchen. So our first step is to add 4 gallons or 16 liters of pasteurized cow's milk to a very large pot. And I am using unhomogenized milk today. Unhomogenized milk is much better for cheese making than homogenized milk. So as we pour our milk into this pot, we might see some clumps of butterfat separated from the rest of the milk. So don't worry about that. We're going to heat all of our unhomogenized milk to 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 32 degrees Celsius, heating it very slowly and stirring it every few minutes. It should take about 15 minutes or so to reach our target temperature. So let's add our milk to the pot. Be very careful with the temperature of the milk. You don't want it to overheat. You really want it to just hit that 90 degree Fahrenheit or 32 degrees Celsius mark. Well, we've hit our target temperature, so it's time to add our bacterial culture to the milk. I'm using a blend of various mesophilic cultures called MA4001. I find it works really well in this cheddar recipe. So we're going to add 1/2 teaspoon to the surface of the milk and let it sit there for 1 to 2 minutes to rehydrate before mixing it in. And now that the time has passed, I'm going to use a very large spoon and mix the milk thoroughly for 1 minute. I really want to make sure that all that bacterial culture that was on the surface gets mixed throughout the entire pot. And after I've finished mixing, I'm going to cover the pot and let it sit undisturbed for 45 minutes. And during that time, the bacterial cultures are going to start converting the milk sugars or the lactose into lactic acid, and that's going to acidify our milk. So I'll see you in 45 minutes. While you are waiting, add 1/2 teaspoon of calcium chloride solution to 1/4 cup of non-chlorinated water. Then add 1/2 teaspoon of annatto coloring to 1/4 cup of non-chlorinated water. Annatto coloring is totally optional. It will just give your cheddar that distinctive orange color. So if you don't have any, you can leave it out. And finally, add 1 scant teaspoon, not more, of liquid double-strength rennet to 1/4 cup of non-chlorinated water and give it a stir. Well, our 45-minute timer has now passed, so it's time to add our 3 mixtures to the pot. First, we're going to add our calcium chloride solution and give it a stir for 1 minute. And then we're going to add our annatto solution. That's going to turn the milk yellowy orange. And finally, we're going to add our rennet solution. We always add the rennet last because it starts to work immediately. So we've added our rennet solution and we're going to mix everything for 1 minute from top to bottom. The magic of the rennet is that it will convert our liquid milk to a gel-like state. And it'll take about 40 minutes to do that. So once we've finished stirring, we're going to still the milk. And we're going to cover the pot and let it sit there for 40 minutes undisturbed. So I'll see you in 40 minutes. So our time is now up. Let's take a look inside the pot. Wow. We want to check for a clean break. We want to make sure that this milk has really gelled and become sort of solid. And we do that by taking a long knife and inserting it into the milk. Is it still liquidy, or does it open up into two clean parts? Well, that one looks pretty good. So now that I see that the milk has gelled, I want to cut this curd into cubes that are about 1/4 inch or 1/2 centimeter. We do that by making parallel cuts. And now that I've done parallel lines in one direction, I'm going to go at a 90-degree angle and do parallel lines again. Now we want to try and make horizontal cuts as well. It's really hard to make horizontal cuts in a tall pot, but do the best you can. And now that I've cut my curd into cubes, I want to turn on the heat to low, because over a 30-minute period, I want to slowly increase the temperature to 102 degrees Fahrenheit or 39 degrees Celsius. And while I am cooking my curds, I'm going to very slowly stir them. I'm going to be very gentle when I do this stirring. I'm more just separating the curd cubes at this point because the curd is still very delicate. So I'm really just going to run my spatula around the outside of the pot. I am not stirring with a lot of force. I'm really being quite gentle. So it's been 15 minutes of me stirring now. And whenever I see a large cube that I might have missed, I just use my spatula and I cut it in half. And you can already see that I can stir much more firmly now than I did 15 minutes ago because the curds are much firmer themselves. Well, we've reached our target temperature of 102 degrees Fahrenheit or 39 degrees Celsius, and while we've been stirring the entire time. So now the next step is to keep the curds at that temperature and stir for another 45 minutes. It's a lot of stirring, I know, but it'll be worth it and you'll be able to enjoy this cheddar for a long time. If you get tired, you can always ask a friend or a family member to step in and do some stirring for you. Well, I'm so glad the 45-minute timer is now done. My arm is tired and I definitely want to stop stirring. Good thing I get to do nothing for the next 5 minutes as I let the curds slowly settle to the bottom of the pot. And after that 5-minute period, I'm going to bring this very heavy pot over to the sink. So please be careful when you're carrying such a heavy pot. Well, I brought this heavy pot over to the sink, and by now most of the curds should have settled to the bottom of this pot and it should be covered with a lot of the whey. I want to remove the whey as much as possible. So let's take off the lid and try and remove the whey by decanting it into the sink. I've got a strainer here that's lined with a little bit of fabric and I'm going to use all my strength to just decant off all of that liquid whey. And now that we've removed so much whey, we're going to put the lid back on the pot. And we're going to let those curds just form a mass over the next 15 minutes at the bottom of the pot. So the 15 minutes is now up. Let's look inside the pot. A lot more whey has accumulated inside the pot, and we're going to get rid of that whey as well. So now we've removed a lot more of the whey, and we're going to put the lid back on, and we're going to let that curd consolidate for another 15 minutes. So if we look in the pot again, we're going to see even more whey has accumulated. That's a lot of liquid, so let's get rid of that. Now we are going to begin what's called the cheddaring process. So over a 2-hour period, we're going to keep our curds warm by filling the sink with some warm water and immersing this pot. We're going to cut this curd mass into slabs and pile them on top of each other, which will create some weight. And every 15 minutes, we're going to remove the whey that accumulates and repile up those slabs. So let me show you how it's done. We want to keep our curds warm while we go through the cheddaring process. So the water is about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is perfect. So we're going to put our pot directly in the warm water. We're going to get a nice sharp knife and make 2 or 3 slabs from the mass of curds in our pot. There we go. I'm going to pile those slabs on top of each other, and they'll put some pressure on each other over the next 2-hour period, and they'll squeeze out even more moisture. And what we're going to do is come back every 15 minutes over the next 2 hours and remove the whey and flip the order of those curd slabs. I like to use my low-tech recording system to keep track, so you might want to use pen and paper or something fancier, something electronic, or get the help of Siri or Alexa to help you with your 15-minute timers. It's up to you. So we finished our first 15 minutes. You can see there's a lot of whey in the pot, which we're going to get rid of. And we're going to take our slabs of cheese and invert them. And we'll come back in another 15 minutes and do the same thing again. So I'm now at the 1-hour mark. I'm halfway through my cheddaring process. And I'm going to make sure that the temperature of the water in the sink is still about 100 Fahrenheit. So it's cooled down to about 91 degrees, so I'm going to add some more water. Bring it back up to 100. At this point, the 1-hour mark, you're not going to be getting very much whey out of the curd anymore, but we're still going to proceed with removing the whey in the pot and flipping those curds again. Well, we've just finished our 2-hour cheddaring process, and it's time to cut our curd into strips. If you used inches, you cut them into 1 by 2 inch strips. If you use centimeters, then 2 by 4 centimeter strips. So I'm going to use a knife here, cut them. I've weighed out 40 grams of cheese salt, or this would be 1.4 ounces of cheese salt. And if you don't have cheese salt, you can use kosher salt. Just make sure it's a non-iodized salt. And I'm going to be sprinkling it on these curds here and mixing it with my very clean hands. First, I'll sprinkle half of the salt, and then the other half. This salt will really give the cheddar a pronounced flavor. Now I'm going to let these cheese curds sit for a couple of minutes while I set up my press. I have my 8.5-inch diameter mold here, which is a perfect size for this cheddar that I'm making, and I've lined it with a very, very clean fabric. This is a specialty cheese fabric that is great for allowing whey to drain further. But if you don't have something like this, you can use a butter muslin or another very, very thin fabric. So I've lined it very well with a little bit extra on one side that can go over onto the top of the cheese later. And I'm going to put my curds into the mold. It's very important that your curds are still warm when you put them in the mold. Otherwise, they won't bind together and make a solid mass. And then I'm going to take the extra piece of fabric on the side and fold it over and put my follower on top. And now it's ready to go into my press. I'm going to bring my press all the way over to the edge of the sink. So any whey that comes out, and there will be whey that comes out, will go directly into the sink. And I'm going to put 35 pounds of pressure on the top of my press and let it sit there for 30 minutes. So the 30 minutes is now up, and we're going to take our cheese out of the press to look at it. It's still very delicate at this stage, and the curds have not yet knit together. But I am going to flip it very carefully and put it back in the press. It definitely needs more pressure, and I have learned from experience for this amount of cheese, the only way to get the curds to knit together really well is to put 75 pounds of pressure on this cheese. So I'm putting the follower back on, I'm putting it back in the press, and now I'm going to let that sit there and drain some more for about 4 to 5 hours. Well, it's been a few hours now that the cheese has been under pressure. Let's take the weights off and take a look at the cheese. It definitely seems to be much more of a consolidated mass now than it was before. That looks much better. There's still some cracks, but those will go as we press this cheese overnight. So let's wrap it back up. So that's 75 pounds put on the cheese again, and we're going to let that press for 8 hours or overnight. So I'll see you tomorrow morning. It's now the next morning, and we get to remove the weights and take a look at our cheese. And hopefully all of those hours of having pressure applied will have created a cheese with no cracks and a nice uniform rind. So let's take a look. Wow, this looks beautiful. There are a few wrinkles around the edge, but I don't care about those. That is a gorgeous cheddar. Now my job is to make sure that this cheddar dries a little bit. That'll take about 4 or 5 days. I want the surface to become dry to the touch before I start a more extensive maturation phase. I have a board which I'm going to lay the cheddar on, And I'm going to flip this cheddar at least once a day, maybe even twice a day. I want air to come in contact with all the surfaces of this cheddar. And I can do that by putting it on a mat like this, or I can use these sushi mats. If I use two of them, I can lay them perpendicular to each other so that a lot of air comes underneath. But I'm going to do both. Well, it's been 5 days now and the surface of my cheddar is nice and dry, so it's ready to go on to its aging phase. I will have to continue to flip this cheese every day for the first few weeks and then every few days as time goes on. I want to store my cheddars at a temperature that's about 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit. I also want 85% relative humidity. That would be ideal. I want to store these cheeses as long as I can, at least 4 to 6 months. It's better if it's a year or two, but you can age it for 5 years or more. It's going to be hard, actually. You'll have to have a lot of patience not to dig into your cheddars. One thing you will have to do is to decide on a surface treatment. Now I'm going to let this one develop a natural rind, which means it'll probably grow some molds on the surface, which I will wipe down with a brine solution and a brush now and then. But you can also vacuum pack your cheese or wax it, or you can be very traditional and you can cloth bandage it. You can see lots of mold is developing on the surface of this cloth bandaged cheese. It just depends on how much care you want to give your cheddar. Now I'm going to do an upcoming video where I have judges come and taste test these 4 cheddars so I can tell which surface treatment created the best tasting cheddar. These all have the same recipe. The only thing that's different is the surface treatment. So I really want to know which treatment will create the most delicious cheddar. Until that video comes out in the future, I hope you click the like button below and subscribe to this channel so you can see all of my videos as they come out. For Give Cheese a Chance, I'm Marianne. Happy cheese making!